Leading a startup team? Whether you're delivering a sugar rush, stocking coffee, or getting a regular delivery of snacks, Office Depot has solutions that fit every startup culture, from getting those first business cards and stationery to ordering fleece pullovers with your new logo. To learn how Office Depot and the California Technology Council have partnered to bring you savings on all of these startup essentials and more, go to californiatechnology.org/member benefits. I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report. About 380,000 infants in the United States, about 1 in 10, are born prematurely each year. So-called preterm births, defined as any birth before 37 weeks of pregnancy, is the leading cause of death for infants and puts these babies at greater risk for cerebral palsy, respiratory and cardiovascular complications, and delays in development. Sera Prognostics has developed a predictive diagnostic that can identify pregnant women at risk of delivering prematurely, allowing for interventions. We spoke to Greg Critchfield, CEO of Sera Prognostics, about the test, how it works, and what it takes to get doctors to adopt the test and payers to reimburse for it. Greg, thanks for joining us.
It's great to be online with you, Daniel.
We're going to talk about Sera Prognostics, your blood test to determine whether a woman is at risk of preterm birth or other complications from pregnancy, and what it takes to get adoption and reimbursement for a predictive diagnostic such as this. Let's start with premature births, though. How common is this, and what are the consequences for the baby?
Premature birth is a huge problem globally. In the world, there are 15 million infants that are born too early. And early is defined as before 37 weeks of gestation. Normal pregnancy is 40 weeks of gestation. Infants born too soon time to fully develop before birth, and therefore they need to be supported. And the support is intensive. The societal, the economic, and personal costs are so high. In the U.S., there are approximately the infants born in the U.S. the 1 in 10 are born too early. Worldwide, the rates vary from about 1 in 20 to as much as 1 in 6. And so, if you look at this, it is an enormous cost. In the U.S., more than $26 billion annually taking care of complications of preterm birth. And many of the complications that occur could be lifetime. The consequences are things like learning disabilities, cerebral palsy, chronic respiratory conditions, intellectual impairment, seizures, vision difficulties, and hearing loss. And these things plague the individuals that affect them, these infants, as they mature through their life. They have these problems, and their families, and of course society also bears the cost.
So who is the preterm test intended for? Is there a way to know if you're at risk or not?
Yeah, the preterm test is actually generated to address a huge need that we have better tools to predict earlier in pregnancy who is at risk. And what we did as a company, we spent our time focusing on providing early, accurate, and individualized risk to patients. We conducted a very large study. It was singleton pregnancies. Remember, if a woman is carrying more than one infant during her pregnancy, she's already high risk. Everything is being done for her that can be done to help keep those babies in utero so they can mature more fully. So we focused on singleton pregnancies where we have the greatest need. For example, a first-time mother, the best predictor of risk for a woman having a preterm baby is if she's had one previously. But in approximately 40% of births, which is the fraction of women that are pregnant pregnant for the first time, you can't ask them, have you had a prior pregnancy? So there was a big gap there, and we focused on providing an early, accurate, individualized prediction for all women, including that subset that needed the most.
The test is not looking at genetics, but actually proteomics. You're looking for certain protein biomarkers that indicate a heightened risk for premature birth. What exactly are you looking for?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me just step back and tell you why proteins are so interesting. Proteins, as you know, encompass the information that is dictated to them by the genetic programming. So there is genetics built into it. In addition, the expression of proteins, the levels of proteins that you see, are a function of the genetic components that's programmed in an individual and the response to environmental conditions. So in some ways, the proteins are closer to the action. Proteins carry out all the functions of life in cells. And so by looking at proteins, we're able to do a functional assessment of the state of pregnancy. And we're able to do it very early. Our test is available in the middle of pregnancy at weeks 19 and 20. That's midway through pregnancy. We're making a prediction about an event that will occur in most cases months later. So what we're doing is giving the doctor and patient time to take steps early on that can help to keep that are designed to help keep the baby in utero longer, so that it is born at a healthier state of development. The proteins themselves were part of a massive effort where we scanned hundreds of proteins, looking for patterns, and asked the question, when in pregnancy do we see the most predictability with protein biomarkers? And what we found is that, as I said before, during weeks 19 and 20, we found a set of proteins when ratioed together in a mathematical formula can actually help us to predict the probability that individual will end up having a preterm baby. And these proteins are hooked in, they're key information nodes in protein networks. As you know, proteins communicate information among cells. The metabolites that are produced in the proteins themselves are in constant communication at a very cellular and even subcellular compartment level. And by doing this, by probing these, we were able to find a very specific set of proteins. We discovered them in one set of specimens. We verified them in an independent set, and then we locked down the predictor and validated it in a study that was published in the American Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology in May. We're very proud of the work. Our scientists did a very rigorous job, and this blood test now stands as the only commercially available blood-based risk test for preterm birth early in pregnancy as a result. The study that we did enrolled 5,501 patients in 11 centers across the U.S. The centers included Massachusetts, Delaware, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, Ohio, Arizona, California, Oregon, and Utah. We made sure that we had an entire representation of the demographics of the U.S. We also slightly overrepresented minorities where patients where patients are known to have higher preterm rates, because we wanted to have the maximum public health impact with the development of a predictor that could tell us who's at risk early in pregnancy.
Well, walk me through the process of a test going from the blood draw to the results. How does it work?
You bet. In many ways, it mimics what we did in the validation study. It's very close to it. The blood is the patient appears with the doctor. They order the test. The blood is drawn from the patient. It is spun down in a centrifuge. The liquid portion is taken off and frozen, and then shipped into our laboratory. We have a laboratory that's operating under CMS guidelines, CLIA guidelines here in Salt Lake City, Utah. That's where the specimens come. We take about a week to perform the analysis. The analysis is done by mass spectrometry. And mass spectrometry is an exquisite technology that's gotten better and better over the last decade. we are able to measure a protein, components of protein, at much smaller concentrations than was previously possible. We can do it reliably. That was the basis of how we did our scientific discovery, verification, and validation work. And that is the basis of the test that is being offered commercially right now. The report is generated by looking at the protein. There's a score there's a score that occurs when you look at the combination of these two proteins, and that score is translated directly into a probability of the event preterm birth, the chance that the baby would be born before 37 weeks. The report goes back to the doctor. There are two numbers that are given to the physician. The first number is that probability, or the chance, the percentage risk that the woman would have the baby too soon, and then the second number is in fact the relative risk compared to the risk in the population. Before the test is done, you don't know what the patient's individual risk. The best estimate we have is what is the population risk of having of this woman having a spontaneous preterm birth. And in the U.S., that number is slightly under 10%. We can actually compare that risk to the risk after the test is taken, where we have clarifying information provided by looking at the protein, and it tells us what the woman's risk is on the basis of what her protein score ends up being. Point about the proteins that I think is of note. So these proteins, as I said, are key information nodes. They are involved in placental nutrition, in growth of the fetus. They are involved in catching inflammatory signals when there is infection, and there are downstream signals with regard to the steroids that help control what happens in pregnancy, the steroids estrogen and progesterone. The names of the proteins are insulin growth factor binding protein 4, IBP4, and sex hormone binding globulin, which for shorthand we say shebang, but sex hormone binding globulin. These are the two key proteins that are linked into the network of information that are at play in the development of a fetus and pregnancy. So there's real compelling biology. These are important proteins, and we were able to generate empirical data that predictions based on these proteins are very good at separating cases, women who deliver too soon, from normal term deliveries.
Well, once a doctor or a patient has this information, are there things they can do to minimize the risk of having a preterm birth?
That's a great question. And let me, before I answer it, what I will say is that the first study that we did was a study to assess the validity and accuracy of the prediction itself. And we passed that hurdle. That's the first study that we did. It was a study done under extreme rigor. We used design control, which is a methodology to build medical devices. And we had a 100% review of every piece of data that went into validation study. Everything was done rigorously, and the validation was actually done externally by ones that had the blind. They broke the blind and gave us back the results, so it was externally validated. It wasn't done internally by the company. Now the question that you asked, what can you do? We are in the process now of designing studies to look at the benefit in terms of clinical outcomes. What can we do to improve the health of these babies, and what are the projections for the attendant cost savings that can occur? As you can well imagine, that's what insurance companies want to see. It comes back to your opening question to me, Danny. The insurers, many insurers would like to know if we do this test and we intervene, what could be done? And the interventions actually do exist. Before our test was available, there were two major predictors of risk for a woman delivering too early. One of them I mentioned already, and that was the woman with a prior preterm birth history, a previous delivery where an infant was born before 37 weeks. Her risk in the current pregnancy of having a preterm birth again is about 30%. There are a set of interventions recommended by professional societies that are followed in those patients. But the problem is, if you look at all preterm births in singleton pregnancies, what fraction of those occur in women in women that have a prior preterm birth history? It's about 6%. So the detection rate is really quite low, looking at across all preterm births. And as I said before, it does no good at all to ask that question to a woman who's never been pregnant before. The other biomarker that was used was actually a short cervical length, and short cervix again account for almost the same percentage of preterm births, singleton preterm births, single fetus being carried in the mother, and with that, the combined probability, detection probability is about 12%. What we do is we are able to assess in all women, women that haven't had a prior preterm birth history, women that don't have a short cervix, we can get the great majority of those with our test. And what is done now is the same interventions that have traditionally been reserved for the two major risk factors can now become available to a greater number of women. We are designing studies right now where we will go into integrated delivery networks that have a strong insurance connection, and we will show that in these groups where women are where the insurance company is at risk for managing the health, we will show with interventions that are already used in high risk patients that applying them to a greater number of women will benefit these women. That's the kind of study that we're doing right now. We'll demonstrate the magnitude of those benefits, and we believe that those studies will become instrumental in ultimately getting to the point of adoption by insurance companies.
Well, what has the conversation with payers been like, and what do you think it'll take to get reimbursement?
Yeah, a great question. The conversations have actually been ongoing from the beginning. We designed the test with the needs of payers in mind from the very beginning. We've talked to more than 65 Medicaid insurers and Medicaid plans about our test moving forward, and the interest has been very high. They asked the same question that you did. If we have this information, what difference will it make? And that is why, of course, we're designing these studies. These studies are not enormous in terms of size, and the one beautiful thing about pregnancy is that the results are known. By 37 weeks, we know whether a woman has delivered too early or not. 37 weeks of conception. So we're in a good spot to be able to generate data quickly. Our estimate is that the studies will take about a year. Our hope is to have launched 2 of these studies by the end of this year, and then as early as late 2017, the readout from the studies will occur. We will be looking at measurements of neonatal health. This is the most important thing to look at. Is the population healthier as a result of using this technology? And with an improvement in health, of course, there's a direct improvement in costs. The babies that are born at a healthier state of development do not generate as much cost because they don't spend as much time in the NICU and in the neonatal ICU unit, and the costs are correspondingly less. So the insurance companies have been very interested. We've had payers contact us and said, we now know that you have finished the work that you told us about, and some of them have not even spoken to us before. They've been asking us to consider doing studies in their plans to demonstrate the value of what we're doing. And that's the work that we're really focusing on over the next year.
We talked about payers, but how about doctors? How much of a challenge is it getting them to become aware of this test and to adapt it?
Yeah, a great question. As you know, physicians, when a new technology comes out, the dictum that I heard when I was in medical school was, don't be the first to adopt a new technology, and don't be the last. And there are rational reasons why people feel that way. Our goal with physicians is to get them to understand that, in fact, there are things that they can do, and they would do them differently. And I think an anecdote is probably the best way to illustrate this with you. We had a meeting of key opinion leaders. These are strong physicians that are leaders in the field. We'd invite them to talk about our test. This is before it was developed, and I gave them a hypothetical case. A woman has a score of 40%. She has 4 chances out of 10 that this pregnancy will end up being a premature birth. And in that situation, I asked the question, "What would you do?" There was quite a bit of discussion between groups. There was one group that said, "I would do everything I could. I'd throw the kitchen sink at this case. I would even give progesterone." Now, progesterone right now is reserved only. It's FDA approved only for women who have a prior preterm birth history, and the professional societies also allow for giving vaginal progesterone. The form for preterm birth history is actually an injectable form, and vaginal progesterone is supported by professional society recommendations. And what they said is we would give progesterone to these women. The other group said, "Oh no, there's no study that shows that you can actually do this." Well, so there's quite an argument. I went over after the discussion was over. I sat down with one of the people who was very vocal about this, and I said, "Now, the story I gave you. Let me give you another piece of information. That patient, the hypothetical patient, is actually your daughter. Would you give progesterone?" This person looked over his shoulder and said, "Yeah, I would. I would actually give her progesterone if she were my daughter." And I said, "Well, that tells me how you're thinking about it. Some physicians will want to do that. It is incumbent on us to quickly conduct these outcome studies where we show the benefit of aggressive intervention, coming in early with progesterone, and show that it works." Right now, according to the ACOG recommendation, a woman with a prior preterm birth history, her chance in this pregnancy of having a preterm birth is 30%. And yet, ACOG recommends giving the drug to the other 70% who will not end up having preterm birth. Progesterone has been shown to be safe. It's part of recommendations. What we're doing now is working with key individuals in these integrated plans to actually demonstrate there is value in intervening more aggressively earlier, and those are the kinds of studies that are going to be done.
Is there a pipeline of other diagnostics behind this?
Yeah, you can imagine there would be. Mass spectrometry is an ideal discovery mechanism because you can do multiple measurements simultaneously, measure even hundreds of proteins simultaneously. We have data that we are developing now for other predictions that can be made of conditions of pregnancy. Preeclampsia, as you know, a leading cause of maternal mortality worldwide. We're looking at growth restriction. We're looking at what does progesterone do to the proteome that can be predictive of response. We're looking at things like this. There are a variety of things that can be looked at. Stillbirth, all sorts of conditions can be probed using systems biology approaches like we've done to figure out how can we better predict these, and then ultimately what will be the specific management strategies that can be developed because we better understand the biology. We're very excited about it. We're working with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who are investors in Sera, to help make our technology available to low resource countries, so that women all over the world can benefit. As I said, 15 million preterm births a year worldwide with 1 million deaths. This is a big problem globally. It's not just in the U.S. And by the way, it's not just low-income countries that have the problem. It's low and high-income countries. So we're very excited. We feel that the biology and the science have developed now to a point where we can begin understanding, making better predictions, and ultimately get to the point where better outcomes can be demonstrated. And that's clearly the strategy of our company. We're fortunate to have good investors that understand that, and that's where we're moving.
Greg Critchfield, Chairman and CEO of Sera Prognostics. Greg, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Danny.
Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send an email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.